Thank you very much, Andrew, and thank you everyone for turning up and listening to us talk today about the work that Lion Landscapes does in conserving large carnivores in Tanzania and beyond. So, as Andrew talked about, big cats in particular and wildlife in general, but particularly big cats, have always been deeply valued in human culture. And you see a little bit of that around you today in these incredible sort of sculptures and models that we see here. And that's existed and been true for millennia. So if you go back as far as maybe 30,000 years ago, the very first figurative art that people carved out of woolly mammoth ivory was of the head of a lion on a human body. So right from that start, that early expression of culture, people were incorporating lions into human culture. And similarly, if you go back to the cave art in southern France, again, about 30,000 years ago, you will see these tableaus that look exactly like the sorts of things you would see if you went out to the Serengeti today. And that culture and that value has persisted all the way to the modern time, as we see here today, and as you see if you look anywhere around you. It's one of those things that if I'm bored, I will walk around and I think, when's the next time that I can see a lion if I'm in an airport or something? And you can find one within about 5 minutes. They are everywhere. So big cats, because their beauty, their strength, their association with heraldry, they are literally all over the place, including, obviously, very relevant today, right go down to The Lion King, the world's most famous musical. And that kind of inspiration is so true. We saw it firsthand. This is my son, Rufus. Lion King hosted us and my daughter, Millie, last week. And it was fantastic just to see them. All of you who've seen it will just know that inspiration that comes from watching such an incredible musical and being uplifted and really recognizing the value that these animals still do have for us, even if they're very far away from most of our daily lives. And that value is not just hypothetical. There are many different values that these species have. So, for example, they have ecological value. You know that if you have species like lions in an ecosystem, you have sufficient prey, sufficient habitat, and really importantly, sufficient human tolerance to maintain them. There are also economic values for the countries in which they occur. So things like phototourism and trophy hunting are ways that local range states generate revenue from the presence of these animals on their land. And there's also just existence value. Even if in a world where we have Uber and Deliveroo and all these crazy things, to know there is still places out there that are so wild that can have lions, that can have tigers and snow leopards out there living wild is something really incredible, and I think inspires all of us. And that's certainly been true for me for an early age. So very different from any of you who listened to Richard's amazing talk this morning, I didn't grow up in Africa. I didn't grow up with wildlife. I grew up with a fairly grumpy domestic cat. And so, but despite that, lions were always what I was passionate about. I loved them. There was something so incredible. And any time I got to decide what we did for a family day out, it was always dragging them to the zoo and staring at the lions, just because they seemed fascinating. And actually, we found a memory box that my brother and I had written in when I was age 10 and he was 12. And it was talking about what we wanted to be doing at the then unimaginable age of 30. And I only had 2 things on my list. I wasn't very ambitious. I had that I wanted to be studying lions in the Serengeti, and I wanted to have a zebra-striped Land Rover. And I happened to spend my 30th birthday in the Serengeti. I'm rarely in the Serengeti, but I happened to be there. I remember watching lions and thinking how random that actually I'm here on this day. It was such a strange coincidence. And when I looked around, going from that kid who was 10 years old, thinking, what do I want to do? How can I get there? How actually is there a way of making this a career? The one place that I found seemed to make a sort of a step towards that was the Wildlife Conservation Research Unit at Oxford University. Because the more I looked into it, I was fascinated by it. And it seemed that whoever you turned up to Wild Cruise, you were given a big cat as your study animal. We've got like David with a lion, David with a cheetah, Arjun with a tiger, Andy with a clouded leopard. So it just looked amazing. So I was lucky enough after my undergraduate degree to go and get an internship at Wild Crew. And I walked in the door and I met David McDonald, who was a huge hero of mine, the founder. And I said, what am I going to be studying? And he said, we've got the perfect animal for you, the water shrew. Now, this is big for a shrew, but it's about 15,000 times smaller than a lion. So I was kind of disappointed. Plus, I don't think it actually exists. I trekked up and down rivers in Wiltshire looking for this thing. It's a mythical beast. It doesn't exist. But this is, I'm sure, photoshopped. Anyway, so never found one, but still I showed enough dedication that David said, I think you should do a PhD here. I was like, great, this is the time for the big cats. And he said, you should do a PhD on water voles. Perfect species for you. I was like, why? So water voles, for those of you who don't know, small, fat, I mean, kind of cute, but it's not a big cat. So I was getting a bit grumpy. Eventually, I sort of graduated onto actual carnivores briefly. You can see the big, scary teeth right there. But I was getting fed up and I said, I really want to go and work on big cats. So I was about to join Cambridge University to go on to their meerkat project. I mean, it's not an actual cats, but at least it's in Africa. And David said, no, we've got a woman coming who you should work with. She works out in cheetahs in Namibia. Would you want to work in Namibia? And I was like, 100%. So I went out to work with Laurie Marker, who's fantastic, who runs the Cheetah Conservation Fund. And I was meant to be out there for 6 months and stayed there for 6 years working with Laurie and learned a huge amount about cheetahs and leopards. But what I learned most about was how she interacted with the local farmers. The farmers would catch cheetahs, they would kill cheetahs, they would often treat them horribly. And she would always be amazingly graceful and kind with these farmers. And I would say, doesn't it drive you crazy having to be nice to these guys? And she said, this is their land, it's their cheetahs. My relationship has to be primarily with them, not with about the cheetahs. And that's something that I've really held with me all the way through my career as well. And so finally, I went on from Cheetah Conservation Fund. I still had this passion to go out to East Africa. So I came here to ZSL to do my PhD with UCL, and I went out to southern Tanzania. This is the Ruaha landscape. This is very few people were working there. This tent is where I was telling some of you earlier on my very first night there, a huge male lion came and slept on this tent. I was deeply terrified, and the only weapons I had to hand were a deodorant spray, which I needed, and a multi-tool. So it was terrifying, but I remember as he lay on me in this tent thinking, wow, like this is the place to study coexistence between lions and people. And when I was doing my PhD there, it was very obvious that coexistence can be very, very difficult and led to a lot of lion killing. So we discovered during the PhD the highest recorded rate of lion killing anywhere in East Africa. It was very clearly a lot of conflict and a lot of killing. This is just one of the major threats to lions. So despite all of the value they have, they are in serious decline. And I think people often don't realize the decline that lions are under because they're so ubiquitous in films, in our culture, in the daily life. And so if you look at them, though, lions have experienced a really strong contraction in both numbers and range. So this is the estimated range of lions in 1890, maybe 200,000 lions. By 1970, the numbers had dropped a lot to maybe 75,000, but you can see the range is still fairly connected. By 2020, it had dropped a lot again, and here you can see how fragmented the range has become. So actually, there are very few landscapes now that have viable numbers of lions. So only around half the remaining populations have less than 50 lions. That's particularly true in West and North and Central Africa. And the question is, do you invest effort there where they are very likely to blink out in the next couple of decades? Or do you focus on the 6 large populations that have somewhere around 1,000 lions left? And so at Lion Landscapes, we do focus on the bigger ones traditionally. But another thing that people don't realize is how much lions rely on human-dominated land. So as Richard was talking about this morning, a lot of their range is beyond protected areas and really relies on this coexistence with local people. So Lion Landscapes, I jointly run it with Elaine Cotterill here, and we work in 2 different countries at the moment in 3 key landscapes. So we work in Rungwe Ruaha in southern Tanzania, Selous-Nyerere, also in southern Tanzania, and the Laikipia landscape in Kenya. And we use lions as an umbrella species. It's not all about lions. We also work on hyenas, leopards, cheetahs, and African wild dogs. And we focus on stopping the main threats to large carnivores, reducing the costs of living with them, delivering local benefits from conservation, as we were hearing about just now, and enabling community ownership of conservation activities. And all of that requires a foundation of healthy habitat, healthy prey, and really depends on properly engaging local people as shareholders and not just stakeholders in it. And the central aspects of our approach, we have 3 core pillars. We aim to stop the loss of wildlife and habitat. We aim to reduce the costs on local people of living alongside this wildlife and to increase the benefits of coexisting with wildlife. And the people here are really under intense pressure already, so they're often very vulnerable. There's a lot of poverty. Food insecurity is a major concern, particularly with things like drought. There's very little access in many places to clean water or improved sanitation. So diseases like cholera and giardia are endemic. And there's very little or no access to high quality medicine. So you have also high levels of illiteracy, particularly with women. So a lot of the household heads aren't literate, and that obviously traps people in poverty. So it restricts their future options. And this, when you put people then living cheek by jowl with some of the most important large carnivore populations left on the planet, that's another burden. And it really is often intolerable for people. So this man had 3 cattle. He was saving one for his son's circumcision ceremony. A lion jumped into his enclosure the night before, killed this lion. It had a huge economic cost and a huge cultural cost to him. He laid out poison and 3 lions died. So it was bad for him. It's bad for the livestock. It's obviously bad for the lions. And as I mentioned, this can lead to very intensive levels of conflict. And around Ruaha, I did my PhD, then we started the project looking at what was really driving this conflict and was there anything that could be done about it. In addition to the sheer numbers of animals being killed, 2 things jumped out at us. The first was that a lot of the animals were missing their right front paw, and that was the only body part that was missing, and we had no idea why. The second was that a lot of particularly the animals that had been poisoned were often heavily pregnant females. So you'd go to them, cut them open, there'd be cubs ready to be born. And this is the ultimate way of devastating a population. And poisonings are particularly devastating. Richard talked about this a bit this morning, but this can be a real nightmare. This was an event where we had a mortality signal on one of our lions. We went there expecting to find 1 dead lion. We found 6 dead lions, and we found 75 critically endangered vultures. So devastating for wildlife. And often people do not want to engage with conservationists. Conservation has a bad history of excluding people, of ignoring people's rights, of not putting local people at the heart of conservation efforts. And that was particularly true with my work in southern Tanzania, where we worked a lot, or tried to work, with a tribe called the Barabeg. And the Barabeg are a tribe that is kind of a sister tribe to the Maasai, that is obviously a much better known tribe. Most people have heard of the Maasai. Very few people have heard of the Barabeg. They wear black, they are nomadic pastoralists, and they're very hostile to outsiders. So they don't want to work with anyone else. They certainly don't want to work with conservationists. When we asked who was doing all the killing, people said, you've got to talk to the Barabeg. They're doing most of the killing. And we were like, great, we'll go and talk to the Barabeg. And we set up our little tented camp on village land, and we tried to talk to the Barabeg, and they ignored us. And we tried again, and they ignored us. And this went on for like 2.5 years. And we would go to their households, and they would just disappear off into the bush. They would ignore us, they would run away. And about nearly 3 years in, I was thinking, this is a nightmare. You know, we're not able to make any headway here. And it may be true that we're just never going to be able to engage properly with the Barabeg. Then we put up solar panels at camp to charge our laptops. And then the Barabeg turned up to charge their mobile phones. And it still kills me that I didn't think of this earlier on. I mean, obviously, you don't ask people to come to your conservation meeting. They don't want to come to your conservation meeting. They want to charge their phone. And so before, people were having to walk about 14 kilometers to charge their phones. So now we offer them a convenient charging station. To be fair, the first time someone came with a phone, I did think it was a gift. That was an awkward interaction. But they came and they waited around for their phones to charge. And of course, people use their phones like everyone else does every day. So they use them to track livestock prices, or to say if there's a lost child in the bush, or to just share funny memes on WhatsApp. So we were finally providing a service, and it wasn't an immediate breakthrough, but people, because they were having to hang around for their phone to be charged, would kind of wait and watch what we did and talk to people a little bit about it. And eventually, after a terrifying incident in the bush where I almost got speared to death, but that's a different story, we ended up having this meeting. They said, if you're this desperate to talk with us, then we'll come and meet with you. So this group of young warriors came down to camp and said, we will talk to you about lions, if that's what we want to talk about. And we were very clear to say to them, we are not the police. We are not the wildlife division. We are, not parks. All we're trying to do is understand why you kill quite this many lions, and if there's a way that you get whatever you're getting without killing quite this many. And so they said, yeah, we think we can work with you. And this was the highest point of the project. It was 3 years in. And finally, we were like, we're in with the Barabeg. So everyone said it wouldn't happen, but we're there. Within a week, that same group of warriors went out and killed 7 lions right around our camp. And this was the lowest part of the project by far. Like, the guys were in tears. It felt like everything was being thrown back at us. And I called up Leela Hazar, who works in Kenya, who's a friend of ours who runs Lion Guardians. And I said, I can't do it anymore. We're done. We've tried so hard. And she said, this is a test. She said, they know you care about lions. You've just met with them and you've said you care about the community. They're testing you. Which do you care about more, the lions or your relationship with the community? So she said, you've got to do nothing. And it was such good advice. It was so good to have someone to turn to who understood the dynamics, who could give me that advice, because I would have done the wrong thing. And sure enough, we did nothing. We measured the carcasses. Everyone knew we knew. And then sure enough, about a week after that, they invited us to their tribal meeting and said, now we'll talk to you. And it was the first time, certainly, they'd had Westerners to these meetings. And it was just amazing to actually sit there and said, now we will tell you about why we kill lions. And there were 5 key reasons. The first one, the most obvious one, was livestock attacks on, carnivore attacks on livestock. So that's the main driver of conflict, and it costs people about 18% of their annual cash income in this landscape. So none of us would put up with losing that randomly. The second one, and this was really important, was a lack of tangible benefits from conservation. So only 2% of people were getting any kind of benefit from the presence of wildlife. The third, and this was really important because we wouldn't have understood it, was cultural issues, particularly from the young warriors. And they explained that when they went out on a lion hunt, the person that threw the spear that first hit the lion, even if they weren't the one that killed it, got to cut off the right front paw and got to take a central claw and then went around the community and showed it off and said, look what I did. And they told them about the hunt, and they got gifts of cattle from the community, which, as we know, is a form of wealth. So this was a way of getting money and of getting status. So they would get attention from women, and it was the way that they could become respected in the community. There is also the fourth one was about myths about man-eating. So unfortunately, in southern Tanzania in particular, there's quite a lot of man-eating that happens. This is a guy that was attacked very close to our camp and was brought in to see if we could patch him up. He survived. But the myths there, it's interesting that these attacks, the lions don't tend to be blamed directly for these attacks. There's a lot of belief among some of the communities there that there are spirit lions. So attacks on people are more likely to be done by the spirit lions. And so that actually reflects, they think another tribe has sent the lion to them. So that actually reflects intertribal conflict more than an issue with the lions. And when we were talking to lots of people, this intertribal conflict was quite a deep driver of some of the wildlife conflict that was being revealed. There's also more broadly a lack of conservation awareness. People just don't know why you should care about lions. They live with lions. There's no perception that they're declining that much. So the first thing that we worked on was the kind of thing that people do all the time, so reducing attacks. So the first one was fortifying enclosures, and about 2/3 of the attacks happened in poorly constructed livestock enclosures. So we worked first of all by reinforcing them with wire. I mean, this looks rubbish. If this was your thing here at ZSL, you'd be shut down. I mean, it's about 5.5 feet tall, but it's amazingly effective. It reduces attacks by about 95%. So this was great at reducing attacks. We also, though, and all shout out to Richard Terreri, who's here, we also use lion lights to make sure that this is something that they, because sometimes they can get in through the gate still, to make sure that this is a slightly lower cost way of doing it, and making sure that people can have these lights that, again, deter carnivores from coming in. And those lights have been really popular and are very sought after. So we're really pleased to have that relationship with lion lights. And also, you don't want to just so you can protect them in the bomas, in the livestock enclosures, but you don't want to just let them out in the morning to slightly hungrier carnivores who are like, thank you. So focusing on grazing livestock is also an issue. So I'd worked in Namibia with Laurie, and they had these Anatolian shepherd guarding dogs. So I thought, let's try them in East Africa. And when we first brought them out, people are like, are you kidding? Have you seen a lion? That looks like a canapé. And so they look ridiculous. I mean, they're cute, but ridiculous. But they grow really quickly into really big dogs and very intimidating. And certainly they can chase off lions. They're meant to sort of alert people rather than physically chase them. But at least one occasion, we found the dog barking furiously and a lioness sitting in the bush being like, what the hell is that? So they can be really good and intimidating. The problem is a little bit that they grow too fast. They need a lot of proteins. That's hard in very food insecure places. We need to understand where this risk occurs across the landscape. It isn't uniform. So we collar lions, and then we understand where they move across the landscape and when the risk hotspots are. So, for example, this lion was in a protected area, and everyone said it isn't the park lions that cause the problems, it's the village lions. But that park lion happily shot across the border into the village land, killed a cow, and came back in the morning looking all pretty for the tourists. So we're like, this is much more of a landscape level understanding than what land use it is. That collaring also enabled a really important part of coexistence, because in Kenya in particular, we were collaring lions. This was led by Elaine Cotterill, who I run Lion Landscapes with. And so we were understanding the movements, but the local farmers were saying, we want to understand the movements. Tell us, we want to have real-time information on where the lions are. And the donors would say, don't do it. Are you kidding? If you tell the farmers where the lions are, they're going to go and kill them. And there was a real trading off of, is that a risk? What if that does happen? But we thought it's really important. Trust is the most central part of any relationship. You've got to trust people. So we shared the information with them, and the lion killings went down significantly. Partly because people genuinely felt, I think, respected and trusted that they are part of this program, and also because they don't want to bump into lions. They want to be able to avoid them, and then they got to know the lions, which is something we didn't really think of. But they were like, oh, Bob likes to use that area by the river. I hadn't noticed that, and I haven't seen him there for a while. So they'd start asking us questions about it, and that kind of relationship was important. We also aim to reduce the use of poison after attacks. It's such an important thing. So we do anti-poisoning training and talking to people about the impact that poison can have. So we do quite a lot to reduce attacks, but the most important thing is trying to co-develop community benefits. So we talked extensively to communities and said, what benefits would you want from conservation? And we particularly engaged women in this. So we focused a lot on talking to them, and they said, look, the key things that we want are education, healthcare, and veterinary medicine. Those are the investments we want to see more in. So we did lots of the sort of the classic work. We support schools with educational materials. We have provided scholarships for secondary schools. So we've provided over 1,000 of these. This was the only time we went against the community, because the community said we don't want to give any to girls. Girls, it's pointless educating girls because they'll get married, they'll get pregnant. And I was like, hello, I disagree. So we gave half to girls, and actually more of them now are going to girls, and the girls are coming back and staying in the community, and people are really seeing that value of higher education for women in a different way. And we're also supporting college studentships now. We found that children weren't able to pass those exams, even with school equipment. When we talked to the community, they said it's because there's no food for them. They walk long distances in the morning, they get to school, and there's no food at school. So they're hungry all day, and they can't study, of course. So we started a porridge project with the local women, and this is just basic, nutritious porridge, eggs, beans. And it's really important, though, the educational attainment at the schools has gone up, and the attendance has gone up at the schools. So we fed over 1 million meals to school children. We also enable access to better medical care with a real focus on maternal and neonatal healthcare, because that was, again, very driven by the women. And we enabled better access to veterinary medicines. So all of this was good. And people would wave at us, and we'd feel smug, and the donors would be happy, and people were still killing the lions. And meanwhile, we were putting out camera traps to do our ecological work, and people were stealing the camera traps because they didn't feel engaged, they didn't know what they were for, they were suspicious. So we were like, oh, everything's going wrong. How on earth do we try to make these things better? And so we sat with the community and we talked about it. And we said, these problems are very clear. And they said, look, let's think about a different way of approaching it. So we worked with them. We co-developed this solution where they would have the camera traps, they would monitor wildlife, and the benefits would be directly tied to the presence of wildlife rather than the presence of the project. And this was such an important step forward. We had a system, it took months to discuss. They wanted a system with points for every wild animal that they camera trapped. Fine, I wanted a simple system of 1 to 5 points per species. I was outvoted because they wanted thousands of points. I was like, fine. So something like a Dick or a Klipspring or something will get you 1,000 points. Something like a primate will get you 1,500 points. It's per individual animal, so this will get you 1,500 points. More for more threatened species and more conflict-causing species, so a hyena will get you 10,000 points. It's also the last picture you'll get before it eats your camera trap. Lions, gotta love the lions, 15,000 points. This lion popped up about a minute after we placed that camera trap. There's a timestamp on it somewhere, but I have no idea where it was. But he popped up, and then the top spot is the African wild dog at 20,000 points. The top spot is the African wild dog. And because it is per individual animal, if you get a wild dog den near you, this picture got them 340,000 points, and they were thrilled. This was the first village that got 1 million points, and they were absolutely beside themselves. And I have to say, this waterhole, it looks like nothing. This photo is so emblematic of a lot of success in the program, because this waterhole used to be a real hotspot of poisoning. They'd poison in the waterhole. The the antelope would die, the carnivores would die, snaring all around it because wildlife would come. And there were wild dog dens nearby and they would get burnt out. And now, after the camera traps realizing how important this waterhole is, they've legally protected the camera traps in that village. They've removed the snares. It's become a real hotspot for generating points for the village. This gets you 0 points. This is the picture you get anywhere in the world. You put young men, camera traps, and alcohol. What else gets you 0 points is snared animals. So we try to disincentivize some of the negative behaviors. So 0 points if there's a snare. And there are extra points for highly traded animals like pangolins. So these points are translated into additional healthcare, education, and veterinary benefits for the communities. And it's been really important at changing behaviors. So it is being really sort of being effective at increasing tolerance for wildlife on village land. We're seeing people being willing to tolerate lion cubs staying on village land, as we said, the presence of things like breeding, wild dog dens. And this pangolin is such a cute story because in one of the villages, somebody brought it in and was going to sell it into the scale trade. And they could have made a decent amount of money. And the community said to them, nothing to do with us. The community said, that is the highest rated thing on our camera traps. And you're taking it from us just so you can get richer. We want to put that back. And so they called us and they said, will you help us release this pangolin? So this is the pangolin on its way back to freedom. And that approach, we call it community camera trapping, is being scaled up internationally. This is it being used in Mozambique, and we're really looking at trying to use it with other projects internationally as well. In terms of addressing cultural issues, so things like money and status, we worked a lot with Lion Guardians in Kenya, and we sort of followed their approach of sort of a really culturally appropriate warrior engagement program. What does it mean to be a warrior? How do you get status in the community? How could that come through conservation? So we employ people to track lions, to sort of look out for if there are lions near, households to chase them away, to be that brave person that you're meant to be able to rely on in the community. They get to learn how to track lions. They have passports. They go to Kenya to learn from the Maasai, for example, up there. And it is really fantastic. So we said to them, this can get the wealth. And so we obviously pay them every month. They don't have to spear a lion to get the wealth, but how on earth do you get the status? Because spearing a lion, that's pretty hardcore. And they said the only other thing that gets more status is learning to read and write, because so few people could do it in this community. So we taught them all to read and write. They now read and write English. And it was funny because some mothers came to us and they said, we used to want our daughters to marry lion killers, but now we want them to marry the lion defenders. For the man-eating myths, we had no idea how to deal with it. We're like, there's all these intertribal things. We have no idea. It seems really deep. And we found the only thing that got young men of different tribes to talk together was football. So we started a football sort of team, and it was very, very softly, just young men of different tribes talking to each other and saying, wow, you've also experienced an attack by a lion. It isn't just a certain tribe that gets that kind of attack. And that's developed now into this annual sports tournament, which is hugely popular, and lots of people want to come. There's games for the women, games for the kids. It's a really exciting part of the year. For conservation awareness, we take people into the park. Most of these people they live right by national parks and conservation areas and don't get to go in because they don't have cars, they don't have credit cards. So when you get to take people in for the first time and watch wildlife in a non-threatening way, it's really different. And people say, wow, I just didn't know that lions could be gentle, or that elephants, play with their young. So that's always a really transformative journey. Also, usually involves a lot of travel sickness if people aren't used to being in cars. So, it's mixed. But people do really enjoy it. We also show films in the local villages. So we go and we show them amazing films, including from National Geographic and from Disney. And this is amazing. People come from all over the place to watch these films, and they have a great time. But the real problem here is that these films are all in English. And even if someone's there translating, the very clear message is this film is not for you. Even though these are the people that will decide if these are the last lions. None of these films are available in full, I found, in Swahili or in Ma or in Barabaig. So I think there is a huge pressure, and I will say this openly to Nat Geo, to Disney, to everyone else, to do more on this stuff. Because if we want to have real impact with these films, it has to be in the language of the people who make most impact on the ground. So I think there needs to be a lot more uptake of that. And because we've got nowhere really very significant with that yet, we started doing it very small on our own. So we wrote this series of children's books, which are in local languages. And basically, this is the first children's book that features a Barabaig kid, and it tells the story of living with lions from the perspective of this Barabaig child. And It's in Swahili, it's in English, because lots of people don't read. We've also got an animated version. Again, we were chatting with Disney about maybe thinking of using their cool animation stuff to like get it out more widely. But it's so good just because it sounds so small. People don't have storybooks. They don't have things like that. And when you can give them to the schools and give them to the families and they can feel represented, it really changes things. And so we've got a few copies of this if anyone wants a kid's book. I have about 5 or 6 copies here. And so that can all work really, that's really important. But we also have to make sure that we're thinking of how do we make this more sustainable long term. You know, we depend a lot on philanthropy, and hopefully that's not going anywhere anytime soon. But we have to think about how do we get new conservation revenue streams without displacing people. So on pastoral land, how do we make sure that we make wildlife presence even more valuable? So for example, in Kenya, we're looking at lion-friendly livestock, so people get an access to a premium market if the lions are there and if they use conservation-friendly livestock keeping. We've worked on lion carbon with some partners called Biocarbon Partners. So this is rather than just doing a carbon offset that maintains forest, you don't want empty forests without biodiversity. So thinking about how do you get premium carbon credits to places with lions and with communities and reward those people. And we're currently running a project to do an innovative financing bond. We're calling it a coexistence bond to look at how can you get more corporate investment into areas where it's the actual coexistence, it's the presence of people as well as the presence of wildlife that unlocks the value, rather than just having, say, a bond that is just on the presence of lions alone and might lead to exclusion of people and the undermining of their rights. So we know this stuff can work in the core area. Livestock attacks have reduced by over 60%, and the attacks on carnivores, the killings of carnivores, has reduced by over 70%. So we are definitely having success for wildlife and for local people, and that's down to a huge number of people, a massive team that is behind us, and most importantly, the communities and everyone else who has put faith in us to take us that far. And what it really shows, I think, is we need a joined-up approach to conservation. We have gone from a place where lions have had that presence for millennia, and still, as we've seen today, and every time if you go to the Lion King, you see that passion for lions and for wildlife and for Africa. And how do we take that and make it a very real value from that global value down to it makes really tangible, important value for the people living at the sharp end of this coexistence? And so community conservation really does need us all. If people think about community conservation, which most people probably don't, they might think of kind of conservationists working with the rural communities. But actually, it takes that global community as well. So it takes the partners like we've got here today. So Disney, ZSL, National Geographic, all the people who work with us, it really does make a difference to come together and say, how do we address these big global challenges and build a better future both for people and for wildlife? Thank you very much.